robust. That's his second point. Conclusion, either the Torah is made up in such a way that it's implausible the Torah is true. Avi, could you unmute and explain why the, quote, generational transmission of the Torah is robust? What does the word robust mean, by the way? I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, so by robust, I mean, as you say, that there is many unlinked chains from Har Sinai or Mount Sinai, for those English speaking, down to the current generation, and that the transmission at any point in the generations, they're not bottlenecked at a few chains. So roughly,
what are you talking about?
What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about.
You need to be more specific, because one of the, like I said, right? There's two things which are attested to. It's not just the inyan of Shalshal to Kabbalah. It's not just the matter of chain of transmission, but it's the matter that a nation always testified that a nation had always transmitted this Torah.
Yeah, well, but again, that's just what I mean when I say robust.
Okay, so elaborate on how the transmission of the Torah is dysfunctional, please.
I didn't. When did I? I didn't.
What is the word? I'm sorry, my English is is good, but not that good. What is robust?
Okay, so I mean, strong and healthy or vigorous.
Wait.
So which I mean that's the general term, but by robust in this context, I just mean that there's many different unbroken chains. By the way, is my volume coming clear?
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, so robust is a good thing. It's not a. It's a strong thing, not a bad.
Okay,
I don't know if the English is your second language.
It is my third language. But so Avi, as a tamami batorat Moshe.
No,
you believe in the Torah? Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, your name is Avi Bitur.
Also, the people listening, they don't.
No. Yeah. But so you believe in the Torah? You believe in the Torah? Yes.
What do you mean when I believe in the Torah? Do you mean
if you're saying that the transmission? You're saying that the transmission of the Torah is sufficient. That's what I'm.
No, I'm just trying to re-render the argument. That's all.
Okay, so do you believe in the Torah?
So the context of that quote when you saw me writing it is what I'm trying to do there is I'm not trying to attack your argument. I think I'm just trying to accurately represent it. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to formalize what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying that my argument is that the Torah, right, is that the transmission of the Torah is sufficient, right? And that because the transmission of the Torah is sufficient back to its original witnesses, it's either made up in a way that's implausible or it's true.
Yeah, but essentially, well, sufficient. I'd use the word robust, and by robust I mean that it's that there's many different generational links that
I hear you.
The same.
I hear you.
I'm sorry.
I hear you.
Yeah.
So, do you believe in the Torah or not? Let's just get to that then.
Yeah, I don't believe that the claims in the Torah are true, but I'm just trying to render. All I'm trying to do right now is
yes, you've rendered it. You've rendered it, though. You've rendered it.
Well, I'd like to render it to the point where you agree with my rendering. So,
okay.
In other words, that you've signed off on what you're saying. This is a formal representation of your argument.
Okay. Do you confess that you personally, do you confess that the transmission of the Torah at the national level is sufficient?
I don't know.
Okay, you're Jewish, yes?
Yes, I am. Well, when you say Jewish, do you mean?
Ata ben Israel, Ken? Are you son of Israel or no? Are you Jewish or no?
You mean? Oh, so you mean ethnically? So yes.
Yes. Okay. Did your grandfather keep Pesach?
No.
Did your great grandfather keep Pesach?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Go to your cousins, right, and ask them, for example, if you have any religious cousins, right?
I actually don't have any religious cousins.
Okay. Find somebody you're related to, right, who can attest, whether it be a grandparent that's alive or a parent that's alive, etc.
But I think rather than asking about my cousins, I think a more productive conversation would be trying to render your argument and representing it accurately, and then
my argument is that I'll just do it really quickly. My argument is that millions of people have transmitted the Torah from millions until the original generation, meaning because hold on. Because millions of people cannot lie, right? There's a consistent. Let me finish, please. Because millions of people collectively cannot lie, right? This means until the original witnesses. This means, right? That the Torah could not have possibly been fabricated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because millions of people all agreed to the transmission of the Torah. They all agreed that the Torah was accurate from their own eyes and so on and so forth in the exact same generation at the exact same time.
Yep.
Okay, that's the argument.
So
Now, please, let's get to the argument.
Yeah. So what? So I'm familiar with the argument, or at least various different forms of it. What you're describing is called the Kuzari argument.
Sure.
The Kuzari. You've heard of the Kuzari, right?
Yes.
Okay. The issue, the reason I'm, and this might sound at first glance, might sound a little bit bothersome, but there's different versions of the Kuzari argument, and I'm trying to. The reason I'm trying.
Tell me your different version. Tell me the different versions that you
Well,
believe.
There's a version given by Dr. Gottlieb, for example. I'm sorry, Rabbi Gottlieb, for
What's
example.
different between it? Okay, so just name all the versions really quickly, then tell me the differences that you think exist in them.
Sure. So, well, there's more elaboration on different points, but sure. So from my recollection, Rabbi Gottlieb is one of the renderers of a variant of the Kuzari argument. Lawrence Kellman is a different renderer of a variant of the Kuzari argument, and the common thing among them is essentially the things that you're saying. But the point is that what you've said is a natural language, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to formalize it so that I can precisely understand.
What are the differences between their two arguments? You've already formalized it fine. The transmission. You've already.
I have. Okay.
Yeah, I've said them all the time.
So you agree with this then? So premise
yes.
one is the generation. Okay.
Yes.
So, okay.
So, but just tell me the differences that you think exist between Rav Gottlieb and Rav Kellerman's argument.
So I'd have to. I don't. It's been, to be honest with you, it's been years since I've read exactly, and I don't want to misquote Gottlieb or Kellerman, so I'd have to get back to you on the different nuances. I don't really remember them exactly offhand, but I don't remember them being identical. I can.
Okay, fine. So just tell me really quickly why you specifically don't believe in the Torah.
Well, I haven't been convinced of it, is the reason.
So you're aware of the argument that a nation of people always transmitted the Torah.
Yes, that's the Kuzari argument.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me, tell me really quickly. Tell me at what specific point did a nation of people agree to lie?
Well, I don't know if I don't know if I agree with either premise. So even if a nation of people never agreed to lie, I don't know that your argument would be sound, because remember, there's two premises to your argument. So you have the first premise, which is a conditional, which is if the generational transmission of the Torah is robust, then either the Torah is made up in such a way that is implausible or the Torah is true. Premise two is the generational transmission of the Torah is robust.
Okay, we heard Shamati. Tell me.
So
how exactly?
Like is just an argument for. Well, I'm just not convinced of either premise, so I'd just like an argument for premise one and premise two.
Tell me why you're not so. So as you know, the essence of the argument is that a nation received this Torah from another nation. That nation received it from another nation. That nation received it from another nation, and so on and so forth. Not from different nations, but from an entire nation.
Generational. You can consider each generation as its own.
Okay, so tell me when the entire nation decided to lie about the exact same thing.
Yeah, so I'm not claiming, again, I'm not
then
claiming.
Give me a circumstance. Give me a circumstance then where they did not all lie about the exact same thing. Like, give me a circumstance that they could all be tricked into believing.
It's not, again, like if you'd look at the argument.
I'm looking at the argument.
It's not clear that it's actually not the case that I need to hold that the generation.
So why don't you need to hold that position?
Because I can reject premise two.
Why? How? Demonstrate.
Or I can at least not be convinced of it. I'm not convinced that the generation. I need evidence that the generational transmission of the Torah is robust.
Okay.
Look, you realize
the nation attested. This is hold on. The evidence that it's robust. The evidence that it's robust. There's echoing, by the way. I don't know why. But the evidence that it's robust, really quickly, the evidence that's robust is that I've already explained it. You have a nation not just saying that our ancestors. Avi, your mic's echoing, by the way. You have a nation that's not just saying that our ancestors stood there 3,334 years ago, right, and received the Torah, witnessed these things, and so on and so forth. But you have that claim being nationally transmitted, but you also have the claim that the nation had always passed that down to the fullness or a fullness of a group of people who composed a nation,
I know
right?
that the current
Until every
nation says that.
generation until time. So there's two things which are nationally attested to, both
By
the
the
Torah
current
itself.
by the current nation, yes, I
By
know that.
the
I know
current,
that.
okay, if the current nation attests to it,
Mhm.
then every generation of the nation attests to it. And the
I
reason
don't see
why,
how that follows.
I'll tell you why. The reason why is because of the fact that they're attesting to two things. Both that they heard from every previous generation that the whole nation stood at Sinai, but also, right, that every generation passed it down. Those are two different claims being transmitted. Meaning we
I
heard from the previous generation, meaning this nation heard from the previous
mhm,
generation,
mhm.
which composed the nation, right? That they received from the previous generation, which
Listen, you
composed the
don't have
nation,
to
that they
explain it to
received
me.
from the
I've
previous
heard the
generation.
argument many times. Listen,
Then you need to give
look,
me a circumstance of how a
okay.
nation could
So,
all be mistaken about this
if
exact same
I
thing.
don't. If you'll just let me listen. So just as a
Dabel,
point of
speak.
process, please. As a point of process, like you don't have to like maybe if you're I don't know if you're doing it for the room, but like I've heard this argument from Kiruv rabbis many times.
Sure,
I'm
sure.
familiar with it.
But give us a
So
circumstance where this could be
I
wrong.
don't. The reason I don't need to give you a circumstance, and this is again, is because all that I know is that I know that there is a group of people that claim that as their nation that they have transmitted this claim from nation to nation, and that such a transmission of the Misora is robust. What I don't
Or means
know,
tradition. Yeah.
yeah, what I don't again, but that doesn't follow from that there was a transmission from nation to nation that
Yes,
was
it does.
robust. Okay, well, if
Explain
you
how.
can deliver
Explain
the
how.
argument
Explain
for
how.
that, then you've
Explain how.
delivered an argument
Let's
for
build.
premise two. Then
Let's build. Explain how. Explain how.
okay, I don't. I just don't see how it follows. So like what
Tell
you're
me
trying to
how.
do is generate an argument for premise two, right?
Tell
So
me
premise two
how.
is the generational transmission of Torah is robust.
Okay.
I'm not convinced of that. And
Why?
what I would like you to do is generate an argument for premise two. Then
If I said that 2 plus 2 equals 5, and you said I'm not convinced of that, you could explain how, why, and how you're not convinced of that. If you're not convinced of that second point, that the generational transmission of the Torah is sufficient and that it's been passed down the fullness of the generation back through every single fullness of the generation, right? You'd
okay, so
have to
let's
give me a circumstance. Wait a second. You'd have to give me a circumstance where an entire nation of people at one point could be mistaken about a tradition that they received from their predecessors at the national level. Both
okay. So
the
this is
claim,
you just
both the
repeating the
claim
claim.
both the claim of the tradition itself and also the claim of the unbroken transmission of the tradition, not back to a few people, but the
Mm-hmm.
transmission of the tradition from nations and nations of people, going all the way back to the original source. Tell me
Yeah, I
how a nation
understand what the claim
could be
is.
mistaken.
You've repeated the claim. That's
Okay, so now give
congratulations.
me a
So now
circumstance in
what
which
I'm
the claim doesn't work.
I don't need to. Again, like
Yes, you
you've
do.
given you've repeated what the
Prove to me
claim
right
is.
now that 2 plus 2 is not 4.
You've
Sorry.
repeated the claim of premise two. I
Bro,
understand that.
prove to
But
me
what I'm asking you is an
that 2 plus 2 is
argument
not
for
5.
premise two. So if we can get an
Wait,
argument,
why
so if we
isn't
can
2
just
plus
get
2
a, so
5?
if we can just get an argument.
I've
Yeah.
given you an argument multiple times.
Yes. Okay. Oh,
Explain
you
to
have.
me.
So, okay.
Yes.
So the conclusion of your argument is premise two. What's the first premise of your supporting argument for premise two?
No, it's not. That's not the first. The first claim is not that the generational transmission of the Torah is sufficient because it's sufficient. That's not the claim.
That's not what I. That's not. Excuse me. Did I
So,
ever write that? I never wrote that.
sorry,
I
my
said
mistake. You wrote the conclusion.
I wrote.
Anyways,
Yeah. When you give a supporting argument for the premise, the conclusion is that premise.
okay.
Right.
The
So what
supporting
I'm asking
argument for
is
the
a
premise. The
supporting argument
conclusion
for
is that
premise.
premise. What does that
Please,
mean? Wait a second.
please.
What does that mean?
I've been pretty respectful here when I've been
Avi
you've been
chayav
cutting me
להסביר.
off like crazy. Okay,
Chayav
look, if I can
לבאר.
just get a word in.
Go ahead.
What I'm trying to show you is that what I'm asking, what's in contention here, at least one of the premises in contention is premise two. And so I'm asking you for a supporting argument of premise two. And
Okay.
when you give a supporting argument of a premise, the conclusion of that supporting argument is that premise. So you'll have one or more premises. You'll have a series of premises, like such as P1, P2, and then the conclusion would be P2 of an original argument, which is the generational transmission of the Torah is robust.
This is gibberish, my friend. Can you
It's
tell
not, I
me?
don't, it's
So
not
what?
gibberish at
So
all.
you know the essence. Okay, let's just get to the point. You know the essence of the argument of national transmission. that two things are transmitted nationally.
I'm just asking you for the I'm just asking.
I'm telling you the argument. Here's what you're doing, Avi.
Okay,
Here's
so
what you're
what's the
doing.
first premise
You're
of your
saying to
argument,
me,
then?
right? Oh, give me your argument. I give you my argument, and then you say that's not an argument. Give me your arguments instead of addressing what I'm saying.
I didn't say it wasn't.
Yes, you did. You said I need
acknowledge
supporting evidence for premise 2. That's what
That
you're
doesn't-
doing.
That's not
You're
the
saying
same.
I need supporting
Not-
evidence for the second
not the
point.
same.
I'm giving you the evidence, and you're saying
Excuse me.
that's not evidence. Give me evidence.
Excuse me, that's not the same thing as me. Excuse me, I did not say that you haven't given an argument. I agreed that you gave an argument. It has
Okay,
two
refute
premises
it.
and conclusion. In fact, I rendered your argument. Of course,
Refute
I agree
it.
it's an argument.
Refute
But
it.
what I'm asking for is
goodness.
an argument for the premise in contention. The premise I'm not convinced of, which is premise 2.
Refute it, please.
So what I would like you to do is to generate an argument with the conclusion that's premise 2. So
I
premise
just did. I just did.
Okay, so
Oh my
premise 1
goodness.
is what?
Premise. Okay, first point. Okay, the two things among the Jewish people are transmitted. Okay, nationally, the Torah and the claim of national transmission, all the way until Mount Sinai. Okay.
Two things among.
Can I just send you like two very short papers that you can just read over or something? And it's not like there's 6 pages. They're literally both of them are 2 pages long.
You can, but in the meantime, I'd like because
I think I repeated myself enough. I think the people, if they're honest,
so you don't.
The people,
wait.
Hold on, Avi. The people, look in your DMs. The people in the chat, on the live stream and on the Discord, if they're honest, will understand what I'm saying. And if they have a critique of my argument, they can give it. They won't just say.
As a neutral judge, I have to say, Avi, you're really dropping the ball here. That's all I have to say.
Avi,
I'm just asking for the argument that supports premise 2. So you started off by saying the two things among, and I lost you when you were repeating the first premise. So
okay, I sent you 2 papers. Okay, they're both 2 pages long. The first premise is that there are 2 things which are transmitted among the Jewish people. Okay. That is both in globally, meaning universally, and so on and so forth. That is both the claim that all of our ancestors, meaning a nation of people, stood at Mount Sinai 3,334 years ago and saw the events that are described in the Torah and agreed that the Torah is true. The second point, right, is that, or the second thing that's transmitted.
Hold on, I haven't written it down. So the two, let me just make sure we agree. So the two things which are transmitted among the Jewish people, is both the claim.
Both the claim of the Torah, the Torah being, happening, right, the events in the Torah happening, and the claim that our ancestors witnessed these events, and also the claim of unbroken national transmission. Those are the 2 arguments.
Torah happened, and the national transmission. So the 2 things that are transmitted among the Jewish people are both the claim. It would be are both the claim that the events of the Torah happened, and the national transmission occurred.
Yes, unbroken every single generation.
Unbroken in every single. Okay, so that's the first premise.
Okay, add like a parentheses or something. Just add this in somewhere. I don't really care where you add it.
Okay.
The entirety of the Jewish people today attest to this, or millions of Jews today attest to this.
Okay, I'll add in parentheses, millions of Jewish people attest to this.
Today, current generation.
Today, millions of Jewish people today attest to this.
Okay. So just to clarify before we continue.
Okay, so that's premise 1, correct?
Yes, before we continue to premise 2, I want to clarify. National transmission means that they claim that it was passed down to them, not by a few people or by a town or by a city, but by the entirety of the nation, from the entirety of the nation, every single generation of the global group of the Jewish people, the global nation of the Jews, attesting the Torah all the way until Sinai. So that's what national transmission means. That's the claim of national transmission, okay? Meaning you have millions of people claiming that millions of people before them claim, that millions of people before them claim, that millions of people before them claim, all the way until Sinai. I'm playing this for everybody else, not for you. All the way until Sinai, that this Torah was always held among the millions of Jews that existed. Now, the second point, a nation of people cannot lie.
Okay, a nation. Okay, premise 2 is a nation of people cannot lie.
Okay.
Point 3 that you're talking about. I'm not sure what modality you mean with cannot lie, but
what do you mean by modality?
Well, there's different. When you say cannot, it's a possibility claim. So you could be, it can entail a contradiction if a nation of people cannot lie, or
They
you could be
can't.
saying that
They can't all agree to lie about like, for example, there's a modern day example of this. I'm just gonna use it anyways.
All right, let's just render. Okay, a nation of people cannot lie.
Yeah.
And then the conclude. Okay, do you have any other premises, or is the conclude? Or
okay, point 3. The Torah is sufficiently transmitted.
The Torah is that just to say the generational transmission of the Torah is robust?
Yes.
Okay, so point 3 is point 3 is the generational transmission of the Torah is robust.
Yes.
Okay, so that is a valid argument.
Okay.
And the reason it's valid is it's because. Do you know why the reason it's valid?
Here,
this is the
argument. It's logical. It's true. I don't know.
Well, the reason your argument is valid is because it's question begging. Because the conclusion appears in the same premise. In one of the premises.
Okay, Avi, here's the problem. You are doing.
Do you know what? Well, do you know what a question? Do you know what?
Avi,
is,
can you please, Avi? Here's what you're doing. Okay, your argument is begging the question because the conclusion.
I didn't give you an argument.
No, I'm quoting you, bro. I'm quoting you. I'm quoting you. Let me finish. I'm quoting you.
You've given me. This is the argument.
Avi, I am quoting you. Let me finish. My goodness. Your argument is that I'm begging the question because my conclusion appears in my premise. The thing is that I'm asking you right now to demonstrate how a nation of people could be mistaken about what they received from an entire other nation of people. That's the difference. You have to give it in a circumstance.
Yeah, so I'm not
putting it into a list of terms. Putting it into a list of terms.
Well, again, the reason why I'm not convinced that I need to give you an account of that is because premise 2 of your original argument was under contention. I asked you for a supporting argument of premise 2. And then you
demonstrate when a nation could be mistaken.
Question 2.
Avi, this is sophistry. My goodness, you are playing with words.
Now I'm just going to ask you for a supporting argument of premise 3 of your supporting argument.
Oh my goodness!
Because you've just.
I'm sorry. Could you give me a supporting argument as to why premise 3 is begging the question?
Well, that's just what. So, do you know what begging the question means?
I'm sorry. Could you give me a supporting argument as to why premise 3 is begging the question?
Yeah, sure. Premise 1, if the conclusion is in one of the premises of the argument, then the argument begging the question.
Okay, can you please give me a supporting argument as to how that's begging the question?
Oh, it's just an analytical. Oh, it bottoms out as an you're for premise 1. That's just an analytical entailment. It's just to find.
Oh, sorry. Could you please give me for premise 1 could you please give me a supporting argument of how that begs the question? See, I'm asking you, how does it beg the question? And you are still begging the question.
It's an analytical entailment. It's defined. That's what it's defined to be. The definition of a question-begging argument is just an argument by which the conclusion of your argument is one of the premises.
Okay, explain how the argument is wrong, or explain how the argument has a flaw.
Well, I'm trying to do that. You
saying begging the question. Hold on.
No, I'm happy to do it.
Begging the question. Avi. Saying begging the question and then refusing to demonstrate how the argument has the actual flaw of begging the question, aside from saying that, your point appears in your premise, is not a valid argument.
You asked me to show you the flaw. Did you actually, when you asked me to show you the flaw, did you actually want me to do that? I'm trying to do that.
I need you to give me an actual, real, demonstratable circumstance.
With your argument. Yeah, just the issue with your argument. It's that it's question begging, and the reason it's question begging.
Okay, fine. Go ahead.
I'm trying to explain it.
Go ahead.
The reason your argument is question begging is that the third premise of your argument is the conclusion of your argument.
Okay, then change the third premise to the conclusion. Then change it to the conclusion.
Begging,
this is the problem with sophists, bro. They argue about literal words. Change point 3 or whatever it is to the conclusion then, or something. I don't see how that changes whether or not a nation could lie.
Point 3 to the conclusion. It is the conclusion.
Okay, change point, then take out point 3 and then add conclusion, bro. Are you okay?
Okay, so
demonstrate to me a circumstance of how a nation would lie.
So then, is this your argument?
Sure.
Well, that's
demonstrate
that's not a formally valid argument.
Okay, demonstrate to me how a nation could lie.
I've already
Demonstrate to me how a nation could lie or be mistaken.
Again, the reason why I don't need to demonstrate that to you is because premise 2 in your original argument.
I'm sorry, but this list of terms and this list of points says that begging the question, logical fallacy. That's all I'm hearing.
And then when you were asked to provide a supporting argument for premise 2, you gave a question begging argument, and then when you made it not question begging, it was formally invalid.
Bro, demonstrate to me how a nation could be mistaken.
Can you just reproduce why I?
My goodness, Avi.
Talking past each other here. So let's just
saying that it doesn't saying that or saying whatever that the conclusion or the premise appears in the conclusion, or saying, for example, begging the question over and over again without actually tangibly begging the question. Without actually tangibly demonstrating how it's begging the question. What is tangible demonstration?
What it means.
Tangible demonstration is where you give me an actual example or circumstance of how a nation could either be mistaken from what they received before, from the nation before them, or if they could all collectively agree to tell the same lie.
Listen, I'm happy to go back to the argument that begged the question and explain to you why I did. So what it means to beg the question is for one of the premises to be the conclusion of your argument, right? So in this case, in the argument that you've rendered,
my goodness,
the argument for premise 2 of your original argument, premise 3, which was the generational transmission of the Torah was or bust, is just the conclusion. So
could you please demonstrate? Okay, so that wasn't the answer to my question. Could you please demonstrate to me how a nation could be mistaken or all agree to lie about a tradition that they received they received every generation before them? How could they all agree to lie like that?
So the reason I don't need to do that is because
your syllogism worship doesn't mean anything. You actually have to give a real demonstrable circumstance. Bro, if 2 plus 2 is 2 plus 2 is not 4 because I can put 2 plus 2 equals 4 into 3 points.
Look, I don't have all night. Listen, I don't have all night from Malding and Cope. So
that's well, clearly you do because you're still saying the same syllogism thing. If it doesn't match my format of points. Avi, you're literally saying it doesn't match my format of points, so therefore it's wrong.
Do you have a supporting argument for premise 2?
Yes, I've already given you the supporting argument. A nation said so, that a nation said, that a nation said, that a nation said, that a nation said, that a nation said.
Yeah, that's the argument. Your first one was question begging. Do you have
explain to me when the nation lied?
Do you have a non-question begging supporting argument?
Do I have a non-question begging supporting argument?
For premise 2, yes.
Okay. A nation transmits a tradition from another nation, meaning not a government, not a small group of people, not a town. The entirety, let's just do this really quickly. There we go. The entirety of the nation, the entirety of the people doing it. That they received it from an entire other people, that they received it from an entire other people, and so on and so forth. Every citizen from every citizen, and so on and so forth.
Could you just listen?
They all attest that they received both the tradition of which they're receiving and the tradition of recounting the transmission in every single generation of its reception, all the way until the original source, which was also a nation. Can you tell me when they all were mistaken, every single one of the citizens in that nation, right, whatever generation it may be, choose any generation, when they became mistaken or they were deceived into thinking that they received that tradition from another people? Not saying that they were mistaken or tricked into believing that their ancestors all did something long before them, but but literally that they all mass hallucinated the reception of the same tradition, right, from an entire other nation of people.
We have some moderator to just allow the conversation to happen.
Avi, demonstrate it.
I don't even know what you want me to demonstrate. You just went on a ramble.
I've already told you. Give me a circumstance of when a nation.
Sorry, we're just gonna mod. I mean, you are talking over him to a ridiculous degree. Now, I don't want to have to get into the muting you over and over again because that's really frustrating for everybody. So why don't we just dial it back a bit? Just listen to what he has to say. Don't cut him off quite as much. Just gonna unmute you here. Go ahead, Avi.
Yeah. So the reason I don't have to give you a example of the nation lying in this case for the conclusion to not follow is because I'm calling into contention premise 2 of your argument, because If premise 2 is false, then it's not the case that I need that.
Explain how it's false.
I don't know if it's false. You're the one making the claim.
Okay, stop. Everything that you just said at this point then means nothing because you can't demonstrate how the second point is insufficient or false.
Wait a minute. No, that's not how it works. You have the burden.
Yes, it is.
Well, no.
I've given you proof. Every time I give you proof, you just say, that's begging the question.
Just
I ask you how.
Okay.
Dude,
Hello,
every time I give.
Oh, God, dude. Okay, so the burden of proof is on you. I already told you I was agnostic. And so you are the one giving the argument. And so the burden of proof is on you to deliver those premises and substantiate those premises, not me. So if I tell you I'm agnostic on premise 2, it doesn't mean that your argument is now sound because I can't disprove premise 2. You're the one who needs to support it. So do you have an argument for premise 2?
I've already supported it multiple times.
Okay, so what
stop, Avi, stop.
Can you support it with a non-question begging argument or a valid one? How about a valid one that's not question begging? Can we get that argument?
Ask yourself. You cannot complain about interruption and then mute me after you interrupt me. But anyways, I've already.
It's actually his server. He can, but let's get. Do you have some? My questions. Do you have?
Because he spoke to me there, I'm just gonna speak up. Like, I'd actually rather not mute you. You might notice that we let you go on for quite a long time, to a point that you were actually, I think, any reasonable person would be able to see, cutting Avi off to a point that he actually couldn't speak, right? You were cutting off the second he started talking. If you can dial it back a bit, some interruption is still okay. I don't need to mute that. But if you're going to make it impossible for him to get his point across, that's not fair, and I will mute you, okay? So if you can play fair, we're happy to let you talk quite a lot, as can easily be demonstrated by the fact that you talked a lot more than Avi for a lot of this conversation.
Avi, I am saying that my evidence is national transmission. I keep providing evidence from the argument that a nation attests that they received this tradition from another nation in an unbroken continuity until a certain point. Your response to that, instead of giving me a circumstance where a nation or a demonstration that a nation could either be mistaken or lie, right, about receiving a tradition in an unbroken manner from one nation to another all the way until the common source, right? That's begging the question, right? That's not evidence. And so I ask you why, and then you say, because it's begging the question and not evidence. I have two people now, Omni and you, who keep resorting to circular reasoning, whatever, to say why what I am saying is not evidence. I've already given you the evidence, and your response, once again, is just that's not evidence, instead of demonstrating how. If I said 2 + 2 is 4, right? And your response was, no, it's 5, okay? And I repeatedly proved to you how it's 4, and you said that none of that is evidence. Putting two things and two things together is not evidence, right? And saying it's begging the question over and over and over again without actually demonstrating how 2 + 2 could possibly be 5, or just saying that 2 + 2 is an insufficient proof, right? Or just saying that 2 + 2 is insufficient to prove that 2 + 2 = 4, right? That would be illogical. You just wouldn't be bringing any sort of reasoning or evidence.
All right. Can I respond, and will you let me respond?
Yes, respond.
Okay.
But bring an example.
So when you asked me to bring an example, my reasoning for not having to bring an example for the conclusion to follow was that premise 2 is called into question. So instead of providing an example of how it can happen, I was questioning whether the transmission was even robust in the first place. And so if that's called into contention, then the implication to the disjunction, the disjunction doesn't follow. So if premise 2 is called into question, then, which I did, then I don't need to give you an example. What I need to do is ask you for support for premise 2. Now, you said I asked you for evidence. I actually haven't asked you for evidence yet. I don't know how you're going to support premise 2. You may give an a priori argument for premise 2. What I asked you was to substantiate premise 2. I'm not trying to limit you to provide evidence. You might provide empirical evidence. Excuse me. I'm not. You may or may not have. I don't think you have. But regardless, I didn't ask you for that. I'm leaving you the room open to provide an a priori argument for premise 2 if you'd like. I'm just asking you to substantiate it with an argument. So we need an argument for premise 2. You gave me one argument that was question begging. The reason, again, I explained to you why it was question begging. The conclusion blatantly showed up in one of the premises. And then when you deleted that premise, it was just a formally invalid argument. So what I'd like to know is, do you have a supporting argument for premise 2 that is formally valid and not question begging? And if you do, so that's a yes or no question. And if you do, let's start rendering that argument. We're starting with premise 1.
Avi, explain to me why saying that a nation received a tradition, both or two traditions, from a
You're
previous
not going to answer
nation.
my question.
Hold on, I'm trying to answer your question, okay? But
So
however,
it's a yes or no. With a yes or no question, so is it a yes or a no?
I don't care what the format of your question was. I'm going to talk
so
about the truth now.
You're not going to answer the question. Then.
If once again, demonstrate. Tell me why it's question begging to say that a nation received from another nation, okay, that they have an unbroken tradition of national transmission.
You even remember
all the way back to Mount Sinai. Tell me why that. Tell me why that argument is.
You even remember the question?
Tell me why that argument is how would you say question begging?
You even know that I asked what I asked.
Can you tell me how?
Hello.
Can you tell me how, please?
I'm not. Do you even know what I've been saying this whole time?
Can you tell me how?
I'm not claiming that your assertion is question. I'm not claiming your assertion is question begging. I'm claiming that the argument you delivered to premise 2 is question.
Why is that?
Because the conclusion was the third premise.
Okay. Why is that question begging?
Because that's the definition of what question begging is.
Okay. Why does that make it wrong?
I didn't say it makes it wrong.
Why does it make it insufficient?
What? I didn't.
Why does it make the argument insufficient? Why does it make the evidence insufficient?
Oh, the reason, the reason it's not convincing is because the very same premise that I've called into question is showing up in the argument in that you're supporting that premise for. And so all I'm going to do is just ask for the argument that I wasn't convinced of in the first place.
Repeat that whole thing again, please, because that just sounded gibberish. Repeat that whole thing again.
The reason question, yeah, sure. The reason question begging arguments are not convincing is because the person is the interlocutor is asking for support of the premise, and if you give that same premise, you're asking for a support of the premise, and if one of your arguments for that premise is just the premise, then obviously they're just going to ask for support of the same thing because they weren't convinced of that in the first place.
Avi, that sounds like nothing to me. You're going to have to explain it in just normal people terms, please.
Okay, I'll try. Maybe if I gave you an analogy.
Finally, a circumstance. Okay, go ahead.
Sure. So let's say I tried to give you an argument that the Torah was false, right? And I said, well, the reason the Torah is false is because anti-theism is true, right? And you say, okay, and so I say, premise 1, if anti-theism is true, then the Torah is false. Premise 2, anti-theism is true. Conclusion, the Torah is false.
That's not what I'm saying.
Wait, I'm just giving you an analogy, please. You're so gun and happy.
Can you spit it out?
You're happy to interrupt me. I'm just trying to give you an example. I'm really trying here. So you as someone who believes in the Torah would call into question premise 2 in that case, right? You wouldn't disagree with premise 1. You would say, look, if anti-theism is true, I agree if that's the case and the Torah is false, but I don't agree that anti-theism is true. And so you would call into question, say, okay, question 2. Premise 2. I'm not convinced of that. Can you please provide me a supporting argument to convince me of premise 2 that anti-theism is true? And let's say I provided you a supporting argument for anti-theism in the following way. I said, premise 1, Christopher Hitchens was a pretty slick guy. Premise 2, anti-theism is true. Conclusion, anti-theism is true.
That's not what I said.
I didn't say that's what you said. I'm just giving you an example. So
you're giving me an example of begging the question?
Yeah, I'm giving you an example of another argument that begs the question.
So then explain to me the correlation between my argument. You're going to have to explain how it's circular. Because right now you're giving me a circular argument.
I didn't look. All I said is that it's begging the question, and the reason I'm trying to just analogize it because I'm trying to help you understand that clearly you wouldn't be convinced by such a supporting argument. And the
That's
reason
okay,
is
but that's
because you
completely
already.
poor. It's completely poor comparison.
Please let me finish.
I heard, but you've already said. I know what you're going to say.
How about you tell me what I'm going to say then?
Yeah, you're going to say or whatever that you wouldn't accept that that evidence or whatever it is because there's no correlation between the evidence and just beg the question.
No, I didn't say
That is literally what you've been saying the whole time. Avi, you're going to have to
I
explain
didn't say
how
anything
national.
about it. Okay, please. I didn't say anything about evidence. You're not going to accept the premise. You're not going to accept the premise. It's clear that you're not going to accept the premise. The anti-theism is true to support the conclusion that anti-theism is true because you weren't convinced of the conclusion anti-theism is true in the first place, and the conclusion is identical to one of those premises. So obviously, you're not going to accept it. So in the case of the Torah transmission is robust, the generational Torah transmission is robust. If that conclusion is just showing up as one of the premises, obviously someone who asked for support of that premise is not going to accept that premise that is just identical to what they were questioning in the first place. That's why it's question begging. And that's why it's not going to convince someone.
Avi, my point isn't that the transmission is robust. I think I've said this a billion times. It's not robust just because it's robust. It's sufficient. Oh my goodness. Yes, you did.
No,
Secondly,
I didn't say.
Secondly, bro. Oh my goodness.
There is just
Let me finish.
Way that this guy's actually tracking through the argument.
Bro, I've heard what he has said. He said it multiple times.
Isaac, maybe you can.
You're not listening to what I'm saying. My goodness.
Sure.
It's like you people. Yeah. If you want to call begging the question, look at your own argument. Anyways,
I don't mind. He wants to step back for. I think he's become frustrated. I can help you understand what he's saying.
Ask yourself. I need you. I heard what he said. I need you. I need you to explain to me right now. Okay. I'm gonna give you. I'm going to.
No, I don't play around like that. You're just gonna get muted. Okay. What I am willing to do, a conversation that I am willing to have with you. I'm happy to help you understand what Avi was saying there. If you want to say you already understand it, then you can reproduce it. But he's leading you through basically a deduction flow, right? And I'm not sure you're tracking that. So, yeah, why don't you tell me if you want to do that or not? Because I would be happy to do that.
I want you to refute the argument. That's what I want you to do.
No. I asked you a simple question.
Okay, I've already heard what he has said.
No, Again, I don't play like that. Avi's nicer. I'll just mute you. You don't talk over me. It's not allowed. Okay. What I am willing to do though is I don't think that you followed his argument. I'm open to being wrong on that. If you want to not his argument, his rendition of your argument actually. If you want to show that you actually do understand it by reproducing it, then I'm definitely happy to do that. If you don't think you can do that or don't want to do that, I'm happy to go through it and help you understand it. But that's the conversation I'm interested in having. If you just keep responding by saying irrelevant things like I want you to defend X, that's not a conversation I'm offering to have. I am offering to have a conversation where I help you understand what Avi was just saying to you. Do you want to do that? That's just a yes or a no.
I'm not going to repeat his...
I will try, I guess, 30 times, but then I'm going to give up, okay? Do you want to have that conversation? Yes or no? Someone can track the times in the chat, maybe.
I literally just...
Okay. Do you want to have that conversation? Yes or no?
I literally just...
Okay. Do you want to have that conversation? Yes or no?
I just said...
Do you want to have that conversation? Yes or no?
I just said no.
Okay. See if you can just give a clear answer. Do you want to have that conversation? I'm looking for a yes or a no. I'm not looking for any kind of ramble. Don't want to hear it. We had a clear answer.
He just said no.
Who was that?
Me, Jinro.
Bye-bye, Jinro. Okay. Do you want to have that conversation?
No.
Okay. If you want to talk to anyone else about anything, you're welcome to. I would suggest, because it seems pretty obvious that he couldn't deal with Avi's argument, I would suggest helping him understand basically what happened in that discussion. In fact, I'll just kind of say here for others listening. basically Avi extracted the first argument, right?
Oh my goodness.
I'm happy to leave you unmuted, but don't talk over me. I'm saying something. Avi extracted the first argument, right? And he said he doesn't actually accept either premise, but he focused on a particular one and asked for the supporting argument, right? So supporting argument, that's going to be some further argument whose conclusion is the same proposition that was a premise in the earlier argument, right? You support that premise by turning it into the conclusion of a supporting argument. The supporting argument that was given had as its third premise the conclusion, right? That's a question begging argument. The premise or the conclusion is in the premises, right? Now, you offered to take the premise out of there that made the argument question begging, but once removed, the argument was invalid. So basically, the flow of the conversation is argument was given, then P2 was challenged, and to justify P2, we were given an invalid argument and a question begging argument. So we're kind of just left at what's the argument for P2? And that's how I would suggest kind of continuing this discussion with him.
He asked me, he said that's begging the question. He gave me an analogy for like an anti-theist, for example, saying that this guy is very cool, therefore anti-theism is true, right? And that I wouldn't accept that as somebody believes in the Torah. I said that my evidence for the transmission of the Torah from one nation to another until Sinai is that a nation of people cannot lie. A nation of people today claim that they received from an entire other nation of people, right? Two traditions, okay? The Torah, okay, and also the claim of unbroken repetition of that same process of transmission from one entire nation of people to another until Sinai. You and his response, your responses were, that's begging the question. However, you have to explain why a nation of people or how a nation of people's testimony is not evidence. That is the essence of the argument. Instead of just saying the premise appeared in the conclusion, because that honestly means nothing. You are trying to paint it as circular when in reality is not. I'm not saying it's true because it's true. I am saying it's true because the witness testimony is sufficient. I'm saying the witness testimony is sufficient because it's founded in a nation. I'm saying that the testimony of a nation is sufficient because of the fact that each of those people could not gather together. It was millions and millions of people all at the same time, gathered together from the east to the west to tell the exact same lie. That's not circular reasoning, right? That's just describing that it's impossible for a nation to lie, demonstrably impossible for a nation to lie. And as a result, we can rely upon the testimony of a nation. So if a nation testifies that it received one tradition or received a set of traditions from another previous generation of a nation, and then that previous generation of this nation received testified to the exact same thing happening, both the actual tradition itself and the level of transmission, right? Or that claim of transmission, then the actual claim itself or the actual testimony of the nation itself is evidence. So instead of addressing that, you just repeatedly said it's begging the question, and you assume that it's begging the question simply because it didn't fit into your format of how syllogisms work. That's the reason why. Not because there was a logical flaw in it, not because there was some kind of contradiction, not because it had insufficient claims or insufficient evidence or insufficient reasoning. You literally just kept calling it begging the question because it didn't fit into your format of a syllogism. So instead, I kept asking Avi to demonstrate how a nation could lie or be mistaken because that's the supporting evidence of the argument, the testimony of a nation. Rather, instead of doing that, he just repeated the same begging the question thing. Can you or anybody else or anybody here tell me how a nation could all tell the exact same lie or believe in the exact same mistake? Anyone?
Well, thank you for bringing the Kuzari argument and trying to run it. I do like to see new arguments or more of the more obscure arguments because this is one of the more obscure theist arguments because there's not a lot of Jewish theists around these parts, let alone the cure of type. But I would really like to engage with someone who could run the Kuzari argument in a formidable way. So if you know of anyone who understands formal logic or who's able to track the things I was saying and could run the Kuzari argument, I'd be open to having a discussion with that person.
I think refusing to actually provide or to actually address the idea of national testimony and explain the possible flaws or critiquing it and so on and so forth, I think that very clearly establishes that you're incapable of addressing the actual argument, which is why you rely on sophistry and syllogisms and so on and so forth, or the idea of specific formats of syllogisms instead of addressing the main point. That is an admission of defeat. That is an admission that you're incapable of actually addressing the argument.
Well, thank you for your time, and thanks for stopping by and running the Kuzari. My offer does still stand.
Tell me when you can address the idea of national testimony and critique it, instead of just saying it's not evidence and not refusing to demonstrate why. Is there anybody here who will actually give